Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Vet Voice Live Earth Day conversation with Representative Salud Carbajal and General Paul Eaton. My name is Mary Kaczynski, and I'm the Director of Government Relations here at Vet Voice Foundation. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We are really excited to celebrate Earth Day with you and for this conversation. So, our topic tonight are efforts to safeguard our nation's public lands, from President Biden's 30 by 30 plan to the pause on new oil and gas leases and restoring and designating national monuments, and the role veterans play in shaping these debates. We have a really amazing lineup for you all tonight. We're going to start with Congressman Carbajal. Later in the evening, we'll hear from General Paul Eaton. And then we're going to hear some stories from some local veterans from the great state of California. To start things off, we are honored to have with us tonight Congressman Salud Carbajal. Congressman Carbajal represents the 24th District of California. He is a longtime advocate for our environment and has truly been a leader in Congress in protecting our natural environment and resources, enhancing public safety, and creating economic opportunities at the same time. Congressman Carbajal, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mary, and General Eaton for having me today. And of course, a big thank you to Vet Voice Foundation for organizing and coordinating tonight. I don't need to tell you that now more than ever, as we gather outdoors and socially distance, Americans have retreated to the great outdoors for exercise, stress relief, and just plain connection. This is especially true for our veterans. I represent the Central Coast of California, what I consider the most beautiful district in the country, and I let my colleagues know that every day. We are lucky to be surrounded by unique natural wonders like the Carrizo Plain National Monument and the Los Padres National Forest, which are cherished by our community. Not to mention a national park, the Channel Islands National Parks, uh, off our coast. Before I served in government, I served in the Marine Corps, where I swore an oath to defend our country from threats, foreign and domestic. In the years since, I have heard from numerous military leaders and national security experts from both sides of the aisle who say that climate change is a threat multiplier, posing a risk to our planet, but also to our national security. Climate change increases the odds of global conflict, impacts our military readiness, and jeopardizes military installations all over the world. A 3-foot rise in sea level would threaten 128 coastal installations in the United States, severely impacting the military personnel and civilians who depend on them. There is no longer any excuses for inaction. Climate change has already cost us way too much money, homes, and lives. We need to act now to tackle the climate crisis and protect our planet for future generations to inherit and enjoy. I'm thrilled to see President Joe Biden take bold and decisive action in his first 100 days to protect our environment. I commend him for pledging to conserve 30% of our public lands and waters by 2030, which will make a real difference in the fight against climate change. I take this commitment seriously too, which is why I introduced the California Land Protection Act to prohibit future oil and gas leasing on public lands on the Central Coast until an environmental review can prove that it won't negatively impact the environment or surrounding communities. With pollution from fossil fuels extractions on federal lands contributing an estimated, get this, an estimated 20 to 25% of our carbon emissions, the climate benefits of conserving our public lands are massive. We ought to go even further and ban oil and gas leasing off California's entire coastline. The very first bill I introduced in Congress was the California Clean Coast Act, which does just that. I'm also proud to have introduced the Central Coast Heritage Protection Act, which passed the House as part of the Protecting America's Wilderness and Public Lands Act. This bill would protect nearly 250,000 acres of land within the Los Padres National Forest and Carrizo Plain National Monument from development. Executive and congressional action to preserve our public lands helps combat the climate crisis and supports Americans physically and mental health as well. But it also helps us grow our economy. In California alone, the outdoor recreation sector contributes an estimated $52.1 billion of added value to the state's economy, supporting over 588 jobs. Supporting public lands helps entrepreneurs and workers alike and will be crucial as we continue to weather this pandemic and set our sights on recovery. As we look ahead, I'm pleased President Biden has made offshore wind a priority and has announced a goal of 30,000 megawatts of renewable energy by 2030. Investing in offshore wind will create good paying jobs and help us transition to the 21st century energy sources. This past year has been difficult, but as we look ahead, I'm optimistic about our future. When it comes to protecting our environment and tackling the climate crisis, I'm pleased to say we're finally headed in the right direction after 4 years. Thank you again for having me. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Congressman, for your leadership and for those inspiring words. Up next, we have General Paul Eaton. Paul Eaton served for more than 30 years in the United States Army, including combat and post-combat assignments in Iraq, Bosnia, and Somalia. He is now a senior advisor here at Vet Voice Foundation. General Eaton, thank you so much for joining us. Over to you.
Mary, thank you very much. And Congressman, I loved your remarks. I love the way you presented. And I am very, very grateful that we have you in Congress because we need all the help we can get. I'm old enough to remember the first Earth Day. And I'm a little bit older than the Congressman. And I feel a whole lot older, actually, sir. But I remember the play that happened in America when 20 million people took to the streets in 1970, 22 April 1970. And an interesting prelude to that was a lady named Rachel Carson, who wrote Silent Spring. And I remember that as a kid because I had a class where I was required to, we weren't required to read it. I was only 12, but we did study it. And she turned the tide on dirty industry. She started a movement that was labeled ecofeminism, which was something that I did not understand then, but I can understand now. And that led to a radical movement to help understand the impact of what human beings are doing to planet Earth. Well, in 1969, Santa Barbara had a particular event with Union Oil and a well blowout that created a great mess and helped stimulate John McConnell, who was a peace activist. So here we have a nexus of events. 1962, Silent Spring. 1968, Dr. King is killed. Bobby Kennedy is killed. The Tet Offensive happens. And as a Marine, sir, I absolutely understand how we build Marines. And Tet is right there with what our Marine Corps was able to do. So we have all this anti-war activism going on, and we've got an active student population in America. John McConnell, peace activist, seizes on all of these events and is able to build a remarkable movement that capitalized on eagles not able to bear offspring because the eggshells have been frustrated by pesticides, and we we hit upon a movement, and that movement endures today. And veterans are very much a party to this, and to have a Marine Corps veteran in Congress who is aiding and abetting this movement. Recently, all three of my children are veterans. My two sons are still serving. Um, one sergeant first class, and one lieutenant colonel. And we amongst us talk about walking off the war. These young Americans, these men and women we have sent to Afghanistan and to Iraq, they come back, and like the book that laid out a troubled woman who seeks the Pacific Coast Trail to to rebuild her life. Veterans are doing the same thing, and the veteran community is a natural community to aid and abet what we're talking about. We the strategic, operational, and tactical implications of climate change are alive and well. Congressman, I just moved down to Key West, Florida. I totally get it. I've got about 7.5 feet between me and the Gulf on one side and the Atlantic on the other. So what I had been philosophical about, it's now personal to me. So my wife and I uh, completely get this. We absolutely thank everybody who is active in the participation in Earth Day, and this walking off the war for our veterans, for our active duty, and for all those who wish to make a contribution. We'll talk about that more in a few minutes, but I am thankful to have this opportunity with Vet Voice Foundation. Mary, thank you. Congressman, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Eaton. And, you know, as a Minnesotan, I could not agree more. This is an issue that unites everyone from coast to coast and here in the Midwest as well. So I know we do have several veterans in our audience from California who are eager to share their stories and ask a few questions. Up first, we have Allison Bailey. Allison spent 12 years in the US Army serving as both an intelligence officer and a military police officer. And I believe she is a constituent of Congressman Carbajal. Allison, thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you for having me. I was up until a couple months ago, but really happy to be here. I am still actually going through graduate school at Bren School of Environmental Science and Management at UCSB. So, my question for Congressman Carbajal is as a veteran who serves in Congress and cares deeply about environmental conservation, what advice do you have for veterans who want to do more to protect our public lands? And what role do you believe veterans play in shaping these debates? And as a former constituent, thank you for your leadership on the Central Coast Heritage Protection Act.
Well, thank you, Allison, and thank you for your service. You know what can you do? What can veterans do? I think keep reminding the American people and all our stakeholders and leaders, be it local government, state, or federal legislators, that conservation is not a Democrat or a Republican issue. When you go back and what Teddy Roosevelt did for conserving so many of our public lands in our country, our heritage as a country is about conserving these majestic treasures because of the positive impact and effect that they have on humanity. Not only is it good for the environment to conserve these wonderful spaces, but the interface that exists between nature and human beings is extraordinary and unsurpassed. And I think making sure that veterans continue to speak up, continue to demand that we conserve more, that we walk carefully to not trample on these very important lands. Once we develop lands, it's really hard to go back. And so when we outline certain areas that we think are pristine or worthy of conservation, to expand land where people can go find solitude, recreate, hunt, um, it's very therapeutic. And for our veterans, who I think sometimes just need to get away, especially if they've been through trauma, to be in tune with nature, I think it's extremely important to preserve these types of lands and experiences for our veterans. So speaking up, reminding people why it's important, and reminding, more importantly, both Republicans and Democrats that this is not a partisan issue. This is our country's heritage.
Thank you so much. I do have a question also, if that's okay for General Eaton. Um, for the veterans, family members, and supporters out there, how can they help advocate for our public lands?
Allison, thank you. So I have had the opportunity to walk the halls of Congress. I have had many meetings with staff members of these wonderful elected officials. I don't know that I've ever visited Congressman Carvajal's office, but I will tell you that I am very, very proud of the young men and women who staff those offices. They are overworked, they are underpaid, and they are energetic, and they just provide for the national security of the United States, and God bless them. And I have seen them take phone calls while I've waited to meet with the with either the representative, senator, or the staff members. And if you want to influence legislation in the United States of America, call your senators, call your congressman or congresswoman. They will be heard. The young man or woman in that office will take notes, will take down numbers, and feed that information to the principal. And I absolutely believe in the process. And the best thing you can do is call your elected officials. You can also reach out, and we have a First Nation woman now in Secretary of the Interior, and leverage our appointed officials and their staffs. The same thing happens there. You call in and you will be heard. And the more you do it, the more leverage that you're able to apply. And I'd like to do a shout out to our First Nation, because many of the lands that we have protected and many of the lands that have been under assault in the last 4 years are culturally and emotionally critical to the pasts of our First Nation members. So that is a cultural touchstone that I think that that we need to capitalize upon. Thanks, Alice.
Thank you so much, Allison. Up next, we have Ricardo Chavez, who is originally from LA. And Rick is a 21-year Army veteran who was stationed and trained on bases throughout California. Rick, thank you so much for joining us. I think we may have lost Rick. Let's give him a minute to see if we can figure this out.
We're working on broadband for more people throughout the country. So we're working on it. In general, you were right on earlier, by the way, in terms of
We're
appreciating
gonna
the
give this
process.
another
I think
try.
sometimes it's hard, it's difficult to keep faith with it. But you're right. We have extraordinary staff in the halls of Congress that do an extraordinary job of making sure we are aware of our constituents' views and concerns.
Yes, sir.
Well, why don't we see if I know we have another veteran who would like to get in the queue here. Sonia Fernandez, wonderful. Sonia is a Marine Corps veteran who resides in Huntington Beach, California. Sonia, thank you so much. Over to you.
Thank you for having me. And first and foremost, Congressman Carbajal, Semper Fidelis, as we always do
Fidelis,
together.
Sonia.
So my question for you is, our fellow veteran Teddy Roosevelt very effectively used the Antiquities Act to safeguard a tremendous amount of public lands, waterways, and to develop the modern national park system. How do you believe President Biden could use the Antiquities Act to achieve his goal of preserving 30% of our nation's lands by 2030?
Well, first of all, Sonia, again, thank you for your service and thank you for your question. And it's great having another devil dog on the Zoom here.
Hoorah.
You know, the Antiquities Act, think of it as a tool. It's not the end all and it's not the beginning of it all. It's just an additional tool that the President of the United States has. The preferred way to really put land into conservation, at least in contemporary times, is really through legislation. That's still the best way to do that and achieve that. The Antiquities Act, nonetheless, is another vehicle available to the president. But there's always legal questions as to whether some of those actions can be undone or not. And so that's why legislation uh, codifies things in a way into law that really put it into perpetuity and permanently. But the Antiquities Act, with few exceptions, can be used in a very similar way. And I think President Biden should keep that in mind if we are not being successful through legislation. That's certainly a tool that he has, and he should consider using it.
General Eaton, I'd like to get a perspective from you. My question for you is, when it comes to leaving the military and reintegrating, what advice would you give veterans about getting outdoors? What is your favorite way to decompress?
Great question. My wife and I are big on the water. We love the oceans. We love boating. We love scuba diving, fishing. That's our outlet. When I was up in Washington State, we would get out to the Pacific coast, and you'd walk over sand dunes and grassy, seagrass to get there, and it was kind of reliving what Lewis and Clark managed to pull off so many years ago. And there would be eagles, and we've got small dogs, so you got to be careful, the eagles. And but it is still startling to me to so many years after Silent Spring to see the resurgence of our eagle population. So it's the wind, it's the water, getting out there in a boat. That's our outlet. But again, to cover walking off the war, the therapeutic nature of nature is just get out as much as you can. And my wife will tell you, with about 8 tours in combat zones for her family, never underestimate the impact of what you did in the military. Every person comes back with some level of post-traumatic stress. And the greatest therapy that we know of collectively in our family is just getting out into nature. Now, I would like to circle back just a bit on what Congressman Carbajal said. The pride with which we look at the Biden administration and bringing additional public lands to be available to our population, it's getting a little crowded now. we're 330 million people right now in America. When the Land Water Conservation Fund was established in 1964, we were at 165 million. We have not kept pace with our population growth. Our visitors, we go to Europe to see old buildings and cathedrals. Europeans come here to see our parks. It's something that simply does not exist in Europe. And so it's getting crowded. We may have to ration what beauty we have. And I think that argument should play very well to our legislators to ensure that while we do what needs to be done with infrastructure, that we should do what we need to do with our wildlands, with our parks, and with our opportunity to get outdoors.
Thank you, gentlemen, and especially thank you again for including the veteran voice in this very important conversation.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I believe Ricardo is back with us, so I'm going to turn it over to him. Rick is originally from LA and a 21-year Army vet. Rick, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you. Are we good? Can we? All right, great. Well, I wanted to say thank you, Congressman, and also General Eaton, just for this opportunity. Congressman Carbajal, recently President Biden issued an executive order pausing leases for drilling on federal lands. The process of issuing these leases is beyond antiquated and hasn't been updated in generations. What are your thoughts on this executive order and the study the White House is currently undertaking on the future of the leasing program?
Well, I think it can be modernized because it needs to be more transparent and conducive for a much more robust public process so that the public can be more engaged. I think it's the way it exists today is pretty administrative and not conducive for what I consider a good public process. And going back to the general, when he was talking about believing in the process, and if we want to continue to believe at least in the process as it relates to this, I think modernizing it would be in order. Because in Congress, our staff are great, but when it comes to the executive orders, to be able to put a pause is one thing, and to be able to take that course of action is one pathway. But really what we need to do is make sure that we're modernizing the rulemaking process, for example, so that we don't get administrations to implement and change policy overnight. There's got to be a much more robust process to ensure that we aren't spoiling our lands, that we aren't impacting the environment, and that we are listening to the people themselves in the areas, the regions where these public lands are at. So I think it is time to modernize the public process. We just have to do it smartly and in a way that achieves our objective.
Thank you so much for that. And again, thank you for your time, Congressman.
Thank you, and thank you.
I'd also like to take an opportunity, question for General Eaton. Sir, when I was in the Army, I trained at Fort Irwin. I saw how the Army went about protecting the environment and the endangered species that thrive within its boundaries. For example, while training to deploy to Iraq, our unit had to stop an exercise to ensure the desert tortoise wasn't harmed. Can you talk more about how the Army and environmental protections intersect?
Ricardo, thank you very much for that. And glad you are safe and sound from tour in Iraq. And I trust that your training experience at Fort Irwin helped prepare you to come back safe and sound. And that would be my puppy in the background. So installation commanders are required and are held in some ways personally accountable for the environmental protection of the installation they command. And Fort Irwin, which is, I have lived a lifetime in 2 months at Fort Irwin, so I know most of that terrain very well. We have to protect our land in order to be able to use it in the future. And I believe that the U.S. military does that very well. We have when we say accountable, we need to make sure that installation commanders do what is expected of them, brief them, resource them. And when I commanded the installation at Fort Benning, Georgia, I had a team to make sure that I was compliant to the laws of the land. And when my lawyer told me that, General, you are going to be held personally accountable, that does have a bearing on how you really wish to execute. So yes, we can hunt elk in the high altitude desert in eastern Washington. We can do a lot of things that we can't do elsewhere. And the puppy that you hear, and sweetie, it's okay, it's okay. So the puppy that you hear is named after General Chesty Puller, because I married a Marine's daughter, and who is, I'm not sure what the deal is, but Chesty is a vocal young puppy, and here we are. So, hoorah! Thank you.
Thank you, General Eaton. And again, thank you so much, Congressman Carbajal, for your time. I appreciate everybody. And to Vet Voice and Mary, thank you all.
Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you so
And
much,
General
Rick.
Eaton, let me just say what an honor and a pleasure it is to be on this Zoom with you. And when you consider the breadth and depth of experience and insight that you bring, I'm just in awe of you and your service. So thank you for your service.
Congressman, back at you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. I know we have a few minutes left, so I'd like to invite you both to make some closing remarks. But first, I would just like Congressman Carbajal to underscore your words from earlier tonight. We have so much to celebrate at this particular moment. We are making progress on protecting the environment, on preserving our public lands domestically and internationally. We're back in the Paris Climate Accords. We have an ally now in the White House who is truly committed to conserving our public lands. And most importantly, sir, we have leaders like you in Congress. We're so grateful for your leadership. Congressman Carbajal, would you like to make any closing remarks for us tonight?
Well, thank you, and that was very kind of you. Your words were very generous. Thank you, Mary, for organizing this, and thank you, General Eaton, for letting me be part of this wonderful discussion. I just would go back to what I said earlier. If you consider uh, the richness that our country has to offer when it comes to our natural resources, we are blessed. And as General Eaton said, people come from our own country and throughout the world to visit these wonderful natural wonders. And it's so important that we conserve our public lands and that we're reminded that this is a long-standing tradition and heritage that our country has put forth to make sure that we continue to build on that legacy of conservation. That our job is not done. There's still way too many lands that need to be conserving, but yet not enough because we are squandering them slowly but surely. And it's not just for the environment. It's not just for our quality of life. It's also to preserve our history because as General Eaton said, there are many cultural resources of uh, the first Americans, the Native Americans that um, predated generations that came to this country from other areas. And many of these public lands have a lot of those those cultural resources that need to be preserved as well. So, um, again, the best thing we could do is work in a bipartisan fashion to achieve our mutual goals of making sure that we are conserving nature and these ecosystems for future generations to enjoy as we are enjoying them today. But thank you, and I thank everybody who participated today, and appreciate the leadership of Vet Voices Foundation. Thank you for all that you do, and thank you, Mary and General Eaton.
Thank you so much, Congressman. General Eaton, any last words for us tonight?
Thank you, Mary. It's harder to get a general to stop talking than to get him to talk. So, it's a Congressman, the fact that you gave your time to us tonight is testimony to how you view your very difficult job. And I applaud you. Thank you very much for the generous donation of your time. If you can't find common ground in what we're talking about right now between the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, I think that we've got some great stress on the system. And this is something that resonates. I mean, it was Richard Nixon who created the EPA. It was Teddy Roosevelt who got the ball rolling on the Antiquities Act, and this is something that all of the 535 men and women in Congress can agree upon is the true future of how Americans recreate and money on it, because tourism is. I'm down in Florida and newly arrived, and people come here to recreate. So it's I see great opportunities for good men and good women to make this happen in Congress. Mary, thank you very much. Congressman, God bless.
Thank you both so much. Well, I will just close out the night by thanking everyone. Congressman Carbajal, General Eaton, thank you so much for your leadership and for sharing your time with us tonight. Thank you to our veterans here in the broadcast and in the audience. We really hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, we hope you'll follow us on Twitter. We are Vet Voice Found, and on Facebook, Vet Voice Foundation. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope you will come again for future Vet Voice events. Thank you again, everyone, and have a good evening.